The line between heaven and earth was once believed to be paper thin. We are exploring 35 enchanted tales of divine miracles to understand a world where the supernatural was daily fact. By the end, you will possess a complete tapestry of medieval wonders that reshaped history. What happens when a simple communion host begins to bleed real human blood? How can a wooden statue weep tears that scientists cannot explain? These are not just stories, they are recorded events that built kingdoms and defined an age of faith. What do you believe is possible when the divine touches our world? Our first tale unfolds in an unexpected corner of the world, a convent in the mountains of Akita, Japan, in the year 1973. Sister Agnes Katsuko Sasagawa, a nun who had recently regained her hearing after being completely deaf, was praying before a simple wooden statue of the Virgin Mary. Then something impossible happened. The statue began to weep, not a trickle of moisture but a steady flow of what appeared to be human tears. This was not a one-time event. The weeping happened repeatedly, 101 times in total, witnessed by many, including the local bishop who would later declare the events to be of a supernatural origin. But the tears were only the beginning. The same wooden figure also secreted a perspiration-like liquid and even bled from a wound on its hand. Scientists collected samples of these mysterious fluids. Their analysis confirmed the startling truth. The tears, the sweat, and the blood were all genuine human substances. This was a physical, measurable miracle occurring in the modern age, a phenomenon that would feel perfectly at home in any medieval chronicle. Alongside these physical signs, Sister Agnes reported receiving 3 profound messages from the heavenly visitor. The messages spoke of prayer, sacrifice, and a warning. They emphasized the importance of repentance to avert a great chastisement upon humanity, a fire that would fall from the sky. This element of divine warning is a powerful echo of medieval Marian apparitions, where the Mother of Christ often appeared to call people back to faith and to alert them to coming trials. The events at Akita, with their blend of tangible proof and spiritual message, create a fascinating bridge. They demonstrate that the medieval understanding of the miraculous, a world where heaven communicates through signs in our physical reality, did not vanish with the advent of science. Instead, it persisted, presenting itself for investigation in a 20th century laboratory. This statue did not just weep tears, it wept a timeless truth that the boundary between the earthly and the divine remains permeable, waiting to reveal itself in the most humble of places. That same language of divine communication through the natural world would be spoken again, not in a secluded convent, but under the open sky before a crowd of thousands. 4 decades before the weeping statue of Akita, in the rural fields of Fatima, Portugal, a prophecy was unfolding that felt lifted directly from a medieval manuscript. 3 young shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos and her cousins Francisco and Jacinto Mato, reported monthly visits from a luminous lady who identified herself as the Lady of the Rosary. She entrusted them with secrets and made a stunning promise. On October 13, 1917, she would perform a public miracle so that all may believe. Word spread, fueled by curiosity and skepticism, drawing a massive crowd to the Cova da Iria that day. Estimates range from 30,000 to over 100,000 people, from devout peasants to cynical journalists. The weather was dismal, a cold, persistent rain soaking the gathered multitude and turning the ground to mud. At the appointed hour, the lady appeared to the children alone. Then Lucia cried out for the people to look at the sun. What happened next defied all laws of physics and human perception. The thick clouds suddenly tore apart, revealing the sun as a distinct silvery disk. It was not blinding, but viewers could stare directly at it without pain, and then it began to move. Witnesses described the sun spinning violently, throwing off brilliant rays of colored light in every direction. It then seemed to tremble and plunge erratically toward the earth in a dizzying zigzag pattern, a celestial dance that induced terror in the crowd, many of whom fell to their knees believing the end of the world had come. As quickly as it began, the sun returned to its normal place in the sky. The collective shock was followed by a second miracle. Every person present and the entire landscape was completely dry. Soaked woolen coats, muddy fields, everything was instantly as if the long rain had never happened. This was a miracle of biblical proportions, a direct intervention in the cosmos witnessed en masse. Its structure is profoundly medieval. A heavenly apparition gives a prophecy to humble visionaries. A public sign is promised to authenticate their message, and the sign itself involves a dramatic manipulation of a celestial body, echoing countless tales of moving suns or mysterious lights from the Middle Ages. Yet it occurred in the 20th century, documented by secular newspapers and skeptics who came to mock and stayed to be awestruck. The miracle of the sun stands as perhaps the last great mass visionary event of its kind, a bridge between an age of unquestioning faith and our modern era of evidence. It cemented Fatima as a global center of devotion, its secrets and warnings about future world events becoming a cornerstone of contemporary Catholic spirituality. The sun did not just dance for those in Portugal, it danced for the modern world, a stark reminder that the heavens can still speak in a language everyone, believer and skeptic alike, is forced to see. But the divine did not only speak through the heavens or weeping statues. Sometimes it answered a crisis of faith with the most intimate and shocking of signs, reaching directly into the heart of the sacred ritual itself. Our journey takes us now to the 8th century, to the ancient town of Lanciano, Italy, a time when the Byzantine rite was practiced in that region. In a small monastery church, a Basilian monk was preparing for the most solemn moment of the Mass, the consecration of the bread and wine. Yet as he held the simple host, a storm of doubt raged within him. He struggled with the very core of his belief, the doctrine of the real presence, the idea that the bread and wine truly, substantially became the body and blood of Christ. It was a moment of profound spiritual agony. Then, as he spoke the words of consecration, the unthinkable happened. The host in his hands visibly transformed. It changed from a wafer of bread into a circle of live, pulsating flesh. The wine in the chalice at the same instant congealed into 5 globules of coagulated blood. The monk stood frozen, his doubts shattered by a physical reality he could not deny. He called the congregation forward, and they witnessed the miracle with their own eyes. The flesh and the blood were then carefully preserved, enshrined in the church as a testament to the event. For over 12 centuries, these relics remained in Lanciano, venerated but unexplained. Then, in the 1970s, with the permission of the Church, a detailed scientific investigation was undertaken. A team of prominent professors conducted a rigorous analysis, expecting perhaps to find ancient bread or symbolic artifacts. What they discovered was beyond any scientific expectation. The flesh was identified as authentic human cardiac tissue, specifically the myocardium, the muscular wall of the heart. It showed the intricate structure of a heart muscle under a microscope, complete with the damage and inflammation one would expect from a severe traumatic wound. The 5 globules of blood, when weighed individually or together, were found to have the same total mass, a physical impossibility for normal matter that seemed to defy the laws of conservation. Furthermore, the blood type was determined to be AB, a relatively rare type, and it was found to contain proteins and minerals in the proportions typical of fresh human blood. This last detail created a breathtaking connection. The blood type AB is the same type identified on the Shroud of Turin, the ancient linen many believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus. For believers, this was not a coincidence, it was a corroboration. The miracle of Lanciano provided a tangible, scientific link across time, from a 1st century crucifixion to an 8th century Mass, suggesting the same divine source. Here was a miracle that spoke directly to the modern mind. It did not ask for blind faith, but presented physical evidence on a laboratory slide. The doubting monk's crisis was met with an answer so concrete that it continues to challenge and inspire over a millennium later, standing as a cornerstone of evidence that faith and reason might, in these extraordinary moments, touch the same profound and mysterious truth. Yet the miracles of the flesh were not confined to transformed bread and wine. Sometimes the divine signature was written upon the body of the visionary themselves, a final, silent testimony that endured long after their death. In the quiet of a convent in Nevers, France, the body of Bernadette Soubirous lay at rest. This was the humble girl who, as a teenager in 1858, had encountered the luminous lady in the grotto of Massabielle at Lourdes. Bernadette lived a life of hidden suffering and profound humility, eventually dying of tuberculosis in 1879 at the age of 35. The Church, following its meticulous process for canonization, required her body to be exhumed for identification and examination. The first exhumation took place 30 years after her death in 1909. The nuns and officials present expected to find only bones, the normal decay after 3 decades in a damp coffin. What they discovered left them breathless. Bernadette's body was not skeletal, it was intact. Her skin had retained a soft, supple quality, and her joints remained flexible. The only signs of deterioration were minor discolorations on her face and hands. Astonished, the doctors present certified the state of preservation as extraordinary and completely inexplicable by natural science. They cleaned the body, applied a light antiseptic, and placed her in a new, sealed coffin. A decade later, in 1919, the coffin was opened a second time for another canonical inspection. The condition was unchanged. The body showed no further decay, defying every law of organic decomposition. It was as if time had simply stopped for her. By the third exhumation in 1925, the cause for her sainthood was advancing. The Church decided to place her body in a crystal and gold reliquary for public veneration. During this final, solemn examination, a delicate wax mask was fashioned to cover the slight discolorations on her face and hands, leaving the rest of her perfectly preserved form visible for all to see. To this day, she rests in the chapel at Nevers, appearing as if in a peaceful sleep, a century and a half after her death. This phenomenon has a name in the tradition of the Church: incorruption. Throughout medieval hagiography, the lives of the saints, the preserved body of a holy person was seen as a powerful divine sign. It was interpreted as a testament to a life of exceptional virtue, a physical echo of their spiritual purity, and a promise of the resurrection of the body promised in Christian doctrine. While science can point to certain environmental factors like soil chemistry or burial methods that might delay decay in some rare cases, the state of Bernadette's body, examined repeatedly over decades by teams of medical professionals, stands far beyond any conventional explanation. Her case is not an ancient legend shrouded in the mists of time. It is a meticulously documented event of the modern era, with signed affidavits from doctors and sworn testimony from witnesses. Bernadette's incorruption creates a profound continuity. It links the simple faith of the medieval world, where such signs were accepted as marks of heaven's favor, directly to our age of documentation and scrutiny. The girl who saw the lady in the grotto, who uncovered the spring that would become the focal point of countless healings at Lourdes, carried the mystery within her very bones. Her silent, enduring form asks us a simple, haunting question. What if holiness could leave a trace not just on the soul, but on the substance of the physical world, whispering of a reality where death does not have the final word? From the silent witness of an incorrupt body, we move to a miracle that defies physics on a staggering scale. The story begins not in Italy, but in the Holy Land, in the humble town of Nazareth. This was the simple stone house believed for centuries to be the dwelling place of the Virgin Mary, the very site where the angel Gabriel announced the coming of Christ. For pilgrims, it was the most sacred domestic space in all of Christianity. But in the year 1291, the political landscape was crumbling. The last Crusader strongholds were falling to Mamluk armies, according to a tradition that emerged shortly after. As the threat closed in on Nazareth, the house simply vanished. It was lifted from its foundations and carried through the night sky by a host of angels. Its destination was a laurel grove in Recanati, Italy, a place now known as Loreto. This was not a one-time journey. The legend describes the house making 3 miraculous flights, first to a site in modern-day Croatia, then across the Adriatic Sea to a forest in Italy, before finally coming to rest in its present location. Each move was marked by a lack of foundation, the house settling directly on the earth, a detail that would become central to its authenticity. For the medieval mind, this was a perfect miracle. It was not subtle. It was a divine relocation service, a celestial rescue mission for a physical piece of salvation history. The Holy House of Loreto instantly became one of the greatest pilgrimage sites in Europe, a place where you could literally walk into the walls that once sheltered the Holy Family. Kings, queens, saints, and countless commoners made the arduous journey, believing that by touching those stones, they were touching the bedrock of the gospel story. But what of the stones themselves? This is where the tale moves from pious legend into the realm of fascinating physical evidence. The house is a simple structure, just 3 stone walls built directly on the ground, with an ancient statue of the Madonna and Child inside. For centuries, the lack of any foundation was the primary proof of its miraculous origin. However, in more recent times, scientific analysis has added another layer. Archaeologists and geologists have examined the stone and the mortar. Their findings are consistent with the tradition, yet they stop short of proving the angelic flight. The stone is a type of limestone not found anywhere in the region of Loreto, or indeed in most of Italy. Its chemical composition matches perfectly with stone quarried in Nazareth. Even the mortar between the stones is made with materials common to the Holy Land but foreign to Italy. Furthermore, the construction technique, the way the stones are cut and fitted, is not Italian. It is a method used by Nabatean builders, the same culture that built the rock city of Petra, and one that was active in the Nazareth area during the time of Christ. So, the evidence presents a profound puzzle. The physical materials of the house are demonstrably from Nazareth. They appeared in Loreto in the late 13th century with no record of being dismantled, shipped, and reassembled by human hands, a nearly impossible feat for the time given its weight and sacred nature. The legend of the angels provided the only framework that made sense to the medieval worldview. Whether one sees a miracle of transport or a mystery of devotion, the impact is undeniable. The Holy House of Loreto stands as a powerful symbol of divine protection. It told a frightened medieval Europe that even when holy lands were lost, heaven itself would intervene to preserve the tangible roots of faith. It transformed a simple cottage into a fortress of belief, proving that sometimes the most sacred spaces are not bound by geography, but are kept safe by a promise that transcends even the laws of the earth and sky. The stones of Loreto spoke of a sanctuary lifted to safety, but another sacred image would face its trial by fire and sword, becoming not just a relic but a rallying cry for an entire nation. In the heart of Poland, within the fortified monastery of Jasna Gora, rests the icon known as the Black Madonna of Częstochowa. Her face, darkened by centuries of candle smoke and veneration, is marked by 2 parallel scars on her right cheek. These wounds are part of her story, said to have been inflicted centuries earlier by a Hussite raider who struck the painting and saw the Virgin bleed from the gash, a sign of her living presence within the image. But her greatest legend was written in the smoke of cannon fire. The year was 1655, and the Swedish Empire, in a swift campaign known as the Deluge, overran the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By the winter of 1655, the seemingly unstoppable Swedish army arrived at the gates of Jasna Gora. The monastery was a spiritual fortress, but its military defenses were modest, held by a small garrison of monks and local soldiers led by the heroic prior Augustin Kordecki. Against the advice of those who urged surrender to avoid destruction, Kordecki chose to defend the sanctuary. For 40 days, the Swedish forces bombarded the walls, launched assaults, and dug siege mines. Inside, the defenders prayed fervently before the icon of the Black Madonna. Then, something shifted. The Swedish attacks, though relentless, began to falter. Their cannonballs seemed to lose their force, often landing harmlessly or failing to explode. Morale among the invaders plummeted, plagued by strange visions and an unshakable sense of dread. Finally, after a failed final assault, the Swedish commander ordered a retreat. The monastery, against all military odds, remained unconquered. News of this miraculous defense spread like wildfire across a demoralized Poland. It was interpreted not as a mere military holdout, but as a direct intervention by the Queen of Heaven herself. The icon became the heart of a national uprising. Peasants, nobles, and soldiers alike saw in her victory a divine mandate to resist. The tide of the war turned. What began as a desperate siege became the catalyst for the eventual expulsion of the Swedish forces, a rebirth of Polish national spirit credited to the miraculous intercession of the Black Madonna. She transformed from a devotional image into a sovereign. Kings would lay their crowns at her feet, and for centuries she has been hailed as the Queen of Poland. Her two scars are no longer seen merely as vandalism, but as a permanent testament. They speak of a mother who bears the wounds of her people, who stands defiant before invaders, and whose silent gaze promises that faith, when woven into the identity of a nation, can become an unbreakable shield. This was not a quiet, personal miracle. It was a cosmic battle played out on a human scale, where the fate of a kingdom hinged on the protection of a single, ancient image, proving that sometimes divine intervention writes its history not in whispers but in the thunder of retreating armies. While the Black Madonna's scars were a symbol of national defiance, another set of wounds would become the ultimate personal emblem of divine love. 2 centuries earlier, in the autumn of 1224, a man named Francis was climbing the rugged slopes of Mount Laverna in central Italy. He was frail, nearly blind from years of ascetic living, and seeking solitude for a 40-day fast. This was not the vibrant preacher who had charmed birds and renounced wealth, but a soul yearning for one final, intimate union with the suffering Christ. His prayer was simple and profound, a plea to feel, both in spirit and in body, the depth of that sacred love. The answer he received would forever change the landscape of Christian mysticism. As he prayed before dawn on the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross, the air itself seemed to ignite. A vision of a seraphim, a 6-winged angelic being, descended toward him. Crucified upon its wings was the figure of Christ. The sight was one of unbearable beauty and sorrow, a fusion of celestial glory and human agony. Then, from the vision, rays of searing light lanced out, striking Francis's hands, his feet, and his right side. The pain was immediate and excruciating, as if nails were being driven through his flesh and a spear thrust into his heart. He lost consciousness, and when he awoke, the vision was gone, but the wounds remained. On his palms and the tops of his feet were raised, darkened marks resembling the heads of nails. In his side was a red, weeping wound. These were not superficial symbols. They bled regularly, especially on Fridays, causing him continual pain and weakness for the 2 remaining years of his life. His companions attested to the reality of these stigmata, helping to bind his hands to contain the bleeding and witnessing his profound suffering. This event was unprecedented. While there were tales of saints experiencing the pain of Christ's passion, no one before Francis had borne the physical wounds themselves. It was the first fully documented case of stigmata, a word that literally means marks or brands. To understand why this was so monumental for the medieval world, we must grasp the concept of imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ. This was the spiritual ideal, to follow Jesus so completely that one's very life became a living gospel. For Francis, who had already embraced poverty and humility, the stigmata was the ultimate fulfillment of that desire. It was not a reward, but a participation. His body became a living parchment, inscribed with the same script of sacrifice as his Lord. He became, in flesh and spirit, an alter Christus, another Christ. The news of this miracle spread like wildfire across Europe, cementing Francis's reputation as a saint even before his death. It validated his entire movement, showing that the path of radical gospel living could lead to the most intimate union imaginable. But Francis's wounds did more than sanctify one man. They opened a mystical doorway. His experience set a powerful precedent, creating a template for a phenomenon that would recur for centuries. After Francis, cases of stigmata began to appear in the historical record, from Catherine of Siena to Padre Pio in the 20th century. Each instance carried the same core meaning, a physical identification with the suffering of the divine, often appearing in individuals known for their deep compassion and penitential lives. The stigmata of Francis stands at a crossroads. It is a deeply personal, bodily miracle of overwhelming intimacy, yet its impact was utterly historical and collective. It answered a medieval longing for tangible connection to the Passion story, proving that the events of Calvary were not locked in the past but could reach across time and touch a human body, transforming it into a silent, suffering witness. In those wounds on Mount La Verna, the boundary between imitating Christ and becoming a living icon of his love was forever dissolved. Yet even the profound intimacy of Francis's stigmata was a private sign, witnessed by only a few close companions. For a doctrine as central and mysterious as the Eucharist to be affirmed for all of Christendom, heaven would stage a public spectacle within the solemn ritual of the Mass itself. The year was 1263 in the town of Bolsena, Italy. A German priest named Peter of Prague was traveling to Rome, burdened by a deep and personal crisis of faith. He struggled profoundly with the concept of transubstantiation, the teaching that during the Mass the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ. It seemed an impossible leap, a spiritual truth he desperately wanted to believe but could not feel in his heart. As he stopped to celebrate Mass in the Church of St. Christina in Bolsena, this inner turmoil reached its peak. Standing at the altar, he recited the ancient words of consecration with a heavy heart. Then, as he broke the host, the unthinkable occurred. The white wafer in his hands began to seep a vivid red liquid. Blood flowed from the bread, soaking through his fingers and dripping onto the linen altar cloth beneath it, the sacred corporal. Father Peter was at first terrified, believing his own doubt had provoked a sacrilege. But the blood was real, warm, and abundant. He immediately stopped the Mass, weeping in a mixture of fear, awe, and overwhelming repentance. He hurried to the sacristy, attempting to hide the stained linens, but the miracle would not be concealed. The blood had seeped through multiple layers of cloth, leaving a permanent, awe-inspiring testament. Word of the event traveled swiftly to the nearby city of Oviedo, where Pope Urban IV was residing. The Pope, a deeply theological man, did not dismiss the report. He ordered a meticulous investigation. The blood-stained corporal was brought to him, and he examined it personally, interrogating the trembling priest and other witnesses. Convinced of the miracle's authenticity, Pope Urban saw in it a divine answer to a growing theological debate and a weakening of popular devotion to the Eucharist. He understood that this was not a private consolation for one doubting priest, but a public gift to the entire Church. In direct response to the miracle of Bolsena, Pope Urban issued a papal bull in 1264, establishing a new universal feast day, the Feast of Corpus Christi, the body of Christ. This was a monumental step. It created an annual celebration focused solely on honoring the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, complete with public processions where the consecrated host would be carried through the streets for all to venerate. The very first Corpus Christi procession was led by the Pope himself, carrying the sacred corporal from Bolsena through the streets of Orvieto. That linen cloth, with its rust-brown stains forming the faint image of a human face, was enshrined as a holy relic in the magnificent Orvieto Cathedral, which was subsequently built in part to house it. Pilgrims still journey there to see it today. The miracle's impact was immediate and doctrinal. It provided a tangible, physical anchor for a spiritual mystery. In an age where faith was often reinforced through visual signs, the bleeding host offered proof that could be seen and venerated. It silenced skeptics and ignited devotion, transforming abstract theology into a story written in blood on simple altar linen. The Feast of Corpus Christi became and remains a vibrant expression of belief, a direct liturgical legacy of one priest's doubt met with a heaven-sent answer that would echo through centuries of processions, hymns, and prayer. Blood on an altar cloth was a visual shock, but the divine could also speak through a melody no earthly instrument could produce. In the hushed tension of a Roman bridal chamber, a young woman named Cecilia prepared for a wedding she had vowed would never be consummated. She was a Christian in secret, pledged to God alone, yet bound by her family to marry a pagan nobleman named Valerian. As the wedding feast roared on, Cecilia sat apart, her heart a sanctuary of prayer. And within that inner silence, she alone heard it, a chorus of unearthly beauty, a celestial harmony that filled her soul. She told her new husband that an angel of God stood guard over her purity, and if he respected her vow, he too would see this guardian. Valerian, moved by her conviction, sought out a Christian bishop, was baptized, and returned to find Cecilia in prayer. There, beside her, stood the radiant angel who crowned them both with flowers from paradise. This auditory miracle, the heavenly choir heard only by the saint, became her defining legend. It explained her serene joy in the face of martyrdom and cemented her role as the patron saint of music. For medieval artists, this was a perfect subject. Paintings and sculptures show Cecilia enraptured, an angel whispering at her ear or a small organ in her hands, forever capturing the moment the harmony of heaven drowned out the noise of a hostile world. Her miracle was one of interior grace, a private concert for the soul that gave her the strength to transform those around her and face a martyr's death with a song in her heart. Yet sometimes heaven's music was not for a single soul, but meant to be heard by all, emanating from the most unexpected of sources. Across medieval Europe, chronicles tell of statues that refused to remain silent. In the ancient city of Ravenna, famed for its shimmering Byzantine mosaics, legends persist of marble figures that would weep or even sing. One tale speaks of a statue of the Virgin Mary in a secluded chapel that, on the eve of a great calamity, began to emit a soft, mournful melody, a dirge that echoed through the empty nave as a warning to the city. Another account tells of a crucifix that hummed a low, comforting tone during times of plague, a sonic balm for a terrified populace. These were not merely stories of moving lips, but reports of a resonant sound, a vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself. What did these auditory phenomena represent to the medieval mind? They were a direct breach in the natural order. Stone was the epitome of the insentient, the cold and silent mineral world. For it to produce sound, especially harmonious or sorrowful sound, meant the divine was animating the inanimate, using the very fabric of creation as its instrument. A singing statue was a threefold miracle. It was a sign of presence, proving God was near and attentive. It was often a message, either of comfort in distress or a clarion call to repentance. And most beautifully, it was an echo of the celestial harmony that Cecilia heard, a hint that the entire cosmos is, in truth, a vast and ordered song of praise, and that even a block of marble could, for a moment, find its voice and join the chorus. In a world without recorded sound, where music was fleeting and live, the idea of a statue holding a permanent note of the divine was a powerful consolation. It suggested that beauty and warning were woven into the stones of their churches, waiting for the right moment of sacred alignment to resonate, reminding everyone that the boundary between heaven and earth was not just seen but could be heard. A silent statue's song is a fleeting wonder, but a summer snowfall endures in stone and memory. In the heat of a Roman August during the reign of Pope Liberius in the mid-4th century, a shared dream visited two men. The Virgin Mary appeared to the Pope and to a wealthy, childless patrician named John. Her request was specific. She desired a church to be built in her honor, and she would provide the sign for its location. That sign would be a blanket of snow falling upon the chosen hill in the midst of the sweltering Roman summer. Upon waking, both men hurried through the dawn streets drawn to the Esquiline hill. What they witnessed defied all reason. A perfect, pristine expanse of white snow covered the hilltop, glittering under the August sun while the rest of the city baked in the heat. The boundaries of the snowfall were unnaturally precise, outlining the exact footprint of the future church. With the city looking on in astonishment, Pope Liberius took a staff and traced the perimeter of the basilica directly in the miraculous snow, marking the sacred ground as instructed. John, the patrician, financed the entire construction, seeing in this miracle a divine purpose for his wealth. The church they built was originally called the Liberian Basilica, but it is known to history as Santa Maria Maggiore, one of the 4 great papal basilicas of Rome and the largest church in the world dedicated to the Virgin Mary. This miracle operates on several profound levels. First, it is a miracle of inversion, turning the natural order on its head. Snow in August is not just unlikely, it is a direct contradiction of the Mediterranean climate, a clear signal of supernatural intervention. Second, it is a miracle of collaboration. The divine sign is given, but human agency is required to interpret it and act. The Pope traces the lines, the benefactor provides the means, and the community builds. The miracle does not construct the church, it initiates the project, inviting humanity into a partnership with heaven. Finally, it creates a permanent physical anchor for the event. Every stone of Santa Maria Maggiore, every glittering mosaic in its nave, stands as a testament to that impossible snowfall. Pilgrims for over 16 centuries have entered its doors knowing they are walking on ground hallowed by a summer blizzard. The tale perfectly captures the medieval mindset, where the divine blueprint for sacred spaces was often revealed through such wondrous signs, blending celestial whimsy with architectural permanence. It suggests that the foundations of our greatest sanctuaries might not be laid by engineers alone, but mapped first in the ephemeral magic of a dream and the cold, miraculous kiss of snow on a summer morning. The summer snow of Rome gave form to a church, but another divine vessel promised to hold the very essence of grace itself. The quest for the Holy Grail stands as the ultimate medieval mystery, a sacred object so powerful it became the pinnacle of every knightly adventure. Yet this was no simple cup from the Last Supper. In the soaring literature of the Middle Ages, the Grail transformed into a living source of miracles. In the hall of the wounded Fisher King, it would float through the air, providing endless food and drink to all present, a direct echo of Christ feeding the multitudes. It could heal grievous wounds and sickness with its mere presence. Most profoundly, it granted visions of divine mysteries to those pure enough to witness it, a window into heaven itself. The Grail was not a passive relic, it was an active fountain of supernatural grace, the ultimate symbol of God's direct, nurturing intervention in the world. Its literary journey began with the French poet Chrétien de Troyes in the late 12th century, who introduced the mysterious Graal in his unfinished romance Percival. In Chrétien's tale, it was a lavish platter or dish carried in a procession, its purpose enigmatic, but the story captured the imagination of Europe. Other writers seized upon it, each adding layers of Christian symbolism and mystery. By the time of Wolfram von Eschenbach's epic Parzival in the early 13th century, the Grail had become something even more wondrous, a stone that fell from heaven, providing sustenance and guarded by a sacred order of knights. This evolution shows the Grail becoming a mirror for medieval spirituality, reflecting a deepening desire to connect the chivalric ideals of the Arthurian world with the deepest truths of the Christian faith. To ground this soaring legend, another ancient tradition took root, linking the Grail to a very real place. The story tells that after the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea, the man who provided the tomb for Jesus, used the sacred cup to catch the blood and water from Christ's side. Fleeing persecution, Joseph then traveled to the farthest edge of the known world, to the misty Isle of Britain. There, at Glastonbury, he thrust his staff into the ground, where it miraculously took root and blossomed into the holy thorn, a hawthorn tree that flowers at Christmas. He founded the first Christian church in Britain at that spot, and according to legend, buried the Grail deep beneath the Tor, the strange, terraced hill that dominates the landscape. This connection transformed Glastonbury into a place of immense pilgrimage, seen as a physical anchor for the Grail myth, a thin place where the divine vessel touched English soil. So why did this particular object become the focus of such an obsessive quest? The Grail represented something unattainable by human effort alone. A knight could not win it through sheer strength or bravery. It required perfect spiritual purity, humility, and compassion. The failures of knights like Lancelot, whose earthly love disqualified him, and the ultimate success of the guileless Galahad made this clear. The Grail quest was the medieval soul's deepest metaphor, the search for direct, unmediated experience of God's miracle. It was divine grace made tangible, a prize that could only be received, never seized. The endless food spoke of spiritual nourishment, the healing spoke of redemption, the vision spoke of revelation. In a world filled with physical relics, the Grail was the relic to end all relics, forever just out of reach, beckoning the worthy onward. A perpetual reminder that the greatest miracles are not found, but find us when our hearts are finally ready to see them. While knights quested for a celestial cup, a princess performed miracles with simple loaves of bread. Elizabeth of Hungary was born into immense privilege in the early 13th century, a royal destined for a life of courtly luxury. Yet from her childhood she felt a different calling, a deep and urgent compassion for the poor and sick that defied her noble station. After her marriage to Ludwig IV, Landgrave of Thuringia, she used her position not for indulgence but as a platform for radical charity. She built hospitals, personally tended to lepers, and gave away her wealth with such abandon that it sometimes alarmed her husband's court. One winter's day, the story goes, she was secretly leaving the castle with her cloak bundled heavily in her arms. Hidden within its folds were loaves of bread meant for the hungry in the town below. Her husband, Ludwig, perhaps having heard whispers of her extravagant giving, met her unexpectedly on the path. Suspicious, he asked her directly what she was carrying. Elizabeth's heart must have raced. To be caught could mean a stern reprimand or worse, an end to her secret missions. With no recourse, she opened her cloak, preparing for his anger. But instead of simple bread, a cascade of fresh, fragrant roses tumbled out, their petals bright against the winter gloom. Ludwig was stunned. In that moment, the humble sustenance meant for the poor had been transformed into a bouquet of impossible beauty, a sign so clear it silenced all doubt. He is said to have remarked that from then on she should give freely, for heaven itself was blessing her work. This charming tale is far more than a pious fable. It operates on multiple levels of profound medieval symbolism. On the surface, it is a miracle of divine protection. Heaven intervened not to stop Elizabeth's act, but to conceal and glorify it, shielding her charity from earthly censure. The roses were a divine seal of approval, a message to her husband and to the world that her work was sacred. More deeply, it speaks to transformation. The bread, representing basic physical nourishment for the body, becomes the rose, a universal symbol of love, beauty, and spiritual grace. the miracle proclaims that true charity is never merely a material transaction. It is an alchemy of the heart that transforms a mundane act of giving into something eternally beautiful, something that carries the fragrance of heaven. Elizabeth's roses place her firmly within a beloved tradition of medieval hagiography, the nature miracle. Saints were often depicted in harmony with or in command of the natural world. Francis preached to birds, flowers bloomed at the feet of holy men and women, and rivers changed course at a saint's command. These stories were not mere fantasy. They served a crucial theological purpose. In a worldview where the fall of Adam had introduced disorder into nature, a saint's ability to command roses in winter or calm a storm was proof of their restored harmony with God's original creation. It showed they possessed a holiness that could momentarily heal the rift between humanity and the natural order. Elizabeth's miracle, therefore, was read as a direct affirmation of her sanctity. It was visible proof that her intense charity was not just a personal virtue, but a channel of divine power, capable of bending the very seasons to protect a secret act of love. Her legacy endures not in grand conquests, but in that fleeting, fragrant image, a winter path suddenly strewn with roses, whispering that the most powerful forces in heaven will sometimes hide themselves within the simplest acts of human kindness. A winter's path strewn with roses speaks of a grace that protects and transforms, but what of a grace that descends onto the battlefield itself, not with petals but with a sword? From the quiet charity of a princess, we move to the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, where heaven's favor was measured in military victory. The chronicles of medieval Hungary tell of such a moment, a desperate hour for King Ladislaus I. He was a ruler in the late 11th century, a time when the kingdom was perpetually under threat from nomadic warriors known as the Cumans. On one fateful campaign, the story goes, Ladislaus and his men found themselves cornered. The Cuman force was overwhelming, a vast sea of riders against his small, beleaguered contingent. Retreat seemed impossible and defeat certain. With his back against the proverbial wall, the king did what many warrior saints before him had done. He dismounted, knelt in the dust of the plain, and prayed fervently for divine intervention. It was an act of ultimate vulnerability from a man of supreme earthly power, and the answer came not as a voice but as a presence. As the Cuman lines began their final charge, a new rider appeared beside the king. This was no ordinary knight. He was clad in resplendent, perhaps even luminous armor, and he bore himself with an authority that was not of this world. Medieval artists and chroniclers would later identify this heavenly champion as Saint George, the dragon slayer, or simply as an archangel, a commander of the celestial host. Without a word, this divine ally charged. Where he struck, the enemy lines broke. His sword seemed to flash with a light of its own, and his very presence ignited a furious courage in Ladislaus and his men. What was moments before a hopeless last stand became a rout. The numerically superior Cuman army scattered in confusion and terror, defeated by a force they could not comprehend. The king, victorious, knew his triumph belonged not to his own strategy or strength, but to the knight who had appeared from the ether and vanished just as swiftly once the battle was won. This dramatic tale of martial rescue is a classic trope in the legends of royal saints, and it served a profound political and spiritual purpose in the medieval world. In an era where a king's right to rule was constantly tested by war and rebellion, a story like this was far more than exciting folklore. It was a form of divine public relations, a celestial endorsement. By showing a king receiving direct physical aid from a heavenly warrior, the chronicle was making an undeniable claim. It declared that Ladislaus was not merely a skilled politician or a lucky general. He was God's own chosen instrument. His crown was not just worn, it was bestowed and actively protected by heaven itself. This legitimized his dynasty, united his people under a banner of sacred destiny, and deterred his enemies, who would now have to consider not just the king's army but his angelic allies. The miracle transformed Ladislaus from a man into a living icon of divine kingship. His subsequent canonization only cemented this. He became Saint Ladislaus, the Night King, and his legend fed a powerful national mythology. For the people of Hungary, it was proof that their kingdom, often besieged on the open plains of Europe, stood under a special, watchful protection. The heavenly knight on that battlefield was more than a rescuer. He was a symbol, a gleaming, undeniable sign that in the great cosmic order, the crown of this king and the fate of this nation mattered to the divine. It whispered that history itself could be shaped by a prayer answered with the sudden, blinding flash of a celestial sword. But a celestial knight's intervention is a singular event, witnessed by a chosen few on a distant battlefield. For a miracle that repeats year after year, witnessed by thousands, we must travel to the very heart of the Christian world. Inside the ancient, cavernous Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, every Easter Saturday, a ceremony unfolds that has not changed for over 1,000 years. The air is thick with incense and the palpable tension of a waiting crowd. Greek Orthodox and Armenian Apostolic clergy, after a meticulous search to ensure no hidden source of fire is present, enter the small, marble-clad edifice built over what is believed to be the tomb of Christ. They are sealed inside. The gathered multitude, a sea of pilgrims from every corner of the globe, falls into an anxious silence, holding unlit bundles of candles. Then it happens. A mysterious, ethereal blue light is said to flash within the tomb. Moments later, the patriarch emerges, his face alight with awe, holding 2 blazing bundles of candles. This is the holy fire. The flame is passed candle to candle, a wave of light rushing through the darkened church and out into the streets of Jerusalem, a living symbol of the resurrection. But the miracle for believers has a specific physical property. Those first flames emerging from the tomb are claimed to be cool. Pilgrims eagerly pass their hands and faces through the initial fire, testifying that it does not burn for the first several minutes. This is not a metaphor, but a reported sensory experience, a flame that illuminates without consuming, echoing the biblical burning bush that blazed without being destroyed. The first written account of this ceremony dates to the 9th century, but its roots are undoubtedly older, placing it squarely within the medieval world of pilgrimage. For a medieval Christian, risking plague, pirates, and bandits on a journey that could take years, the reward was this: to stand in that church and receive a flame lit by no human hand. It was the ultimate tangible connection. To light your candle from that miraculous fire was to touch, in a literal sense, the mystery of Easter itself, to carry home a physical spark from the tomb that could not hold its occupant. The holy fire is a miracle of rhythm and renewal. It does not belong to one time but to all time, repeating annually as a perpetual promise. It binds the personal devotion of the pilgrim to the cosmic story of resurrection, offering a flame that they believe first kindled in the darkness of a garden tomb on the 3rd day. In that shared, breathless moment of anticipation before the light appears, centuries collapse. The medieval pilgrim and the modern traveler stand shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the same blue flash, hoping to feel the same cool flame, united by a miracle that refuses to be confined to history, choosing instead to ignite again and again in the living present. The cool flame of Jerusalem is a promise of spiritual renewal, but the promise of physical healing drew the world to a different grotto, one carved by a river in the foothills of the Pyrenees. 4 years before the holy fire was formally documented in the 9th century, another spring was discovered not by priests but by a poverty-stricken 14-year-old girl. In 1858, Bernadette Soubirous, whose incorrupt body we encountered earlier, was gathering firewood near the town of Lourdes when a gust of wind drew her attention to a small, damp cave known as the Massabielle Rock. There, in a niche within the rock, a beautiful lady appeared to her, clothed in white with a blue sash and a rosary draped over her arm. This was the first of 18 apparitions. During one of these visits on February 25th, the lady instructed Bernadette to drink from the spring and wash in it. Bernadette, confused, saw only a patch of damp ground. She began to scrape at the earth with her hands until a small, muddy puddle formed. She cupped the murky water to her face, an act that drew ridicule from the growing crowd of onlookers who saw a delirious girl eating dirt. Yet from that small, scratched hollow, a trickle began. It grew hour by hour into a steady, clear stream. By the next day, it was a full-flowing spring, pouring out over 4,000 gallons of water every day since. The lady had revealed a source where there was none, a permanent wellspring of grace from a barren rock. This was the genesis of Lourdes, a place that would become the single greatest focal point for healing miracles in the modern world. A direct continuation of the medieval tradition where sacred springs and holy sites were believed to channel divine curative power. The first person to test that power in a documented, miraculous way was a young woman named Marie Bailey. She arrived at Lourdes in the very first year of the spring's existence in 1858, carried on a litter. She was 22 years old and dying. Doctors had diagnosed her with advanced tubercular peritonitis, a brutal and universally fatal condition at the time. Her abdomen was grotesquely swollen with fluid, her body racked with fever, and she could barely breathe. Two friends, members of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, had brought her on the arduous journey as a final act of mercy, hoping the new shrine might offer her spiritual peace before death. A skeptical young doctor named Prosper Gustave Nonat, who was traveling with the pilgrimage out of curiosity, examined her upon arrival. He confirmed the terminal diagnosis and noted her extreme weakness, expecting her to die within hours. Her friends carried her to the grotto and, following the example of Bernadette, immersed her in the icy, newly flowing water. The shock of the cold on her feverish body was severe. They pulled her out, dried her, and laid her back on the litter, assuming the ordeal was over. But then something impossible began to happen. Marie reported a feeling of intense heat coursing through her body, driving out the chill. Before the eyes of her friends and the gathered crowd, the massive, hard swelling of her abdomen began to soften and recede, minute by minute, like a deflating balloon. Within 30 minutes, the ascites, the fluid that had distended her belly, had completely vanished. Her breathing eased, her fever broke, and color returned to her face. The skeptical Dr. Nonat rushed over and conducted a new examination. He found no trace of the disease. Her abdomen was normal, soft, and pain-free. She was not just improved, she was cured. Marie Bailey sat up, then stood. She walked, she felt hunger and ate a full meal. She had arrived dying and left completely healed, a transformation that Dr. Nonat, despite his initial doubts, was forced to attest to in writing. She would go on to live a healthy life, eventually joining the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul and serving for many years, a walking testament to the spring's power. Marie Bailey's cure established the pattern for Lourdes. It was sudden, complete, and medically inexplicable, occurring immediately after contact with the water from the spring. It was witnessed by a medical professional whose initial skepticism lent credibility to his verification. And it happened not in the dim past, but in the age of modern diagnosis, with a documented illness that had a certain fatal prognosis. Lourdes did not invent the healing shrine. Throughout the Middle Ages, pilgrims flocked to the tombs of saints like Thomas Becket in Canterbury or sought out holy wells, believing these places were conduits for divine healing. Lourdes resurrected this ancient archetype for the industrial age. It created a formal, medicalized process for investigating miracles, with an international medical committee that rigorously examines each claimed cure, rejecting over 99% of them. The few that are certified, like Marie Bailey's, stand as stubborn anomalies, cases where a terminal illness disappears in an instant, defying every model of natural remission. This makes Lourdes the modern epicenter of a very medieval phenomenon. It is a place where the veil between the physical and spiritual world seems to grow thin, where the act of pilgrimage, of bathing in icy water, becomes a vessel for a grace that operates not just on the soul, but on ravaged cells and failing organs. The spring that Bernadette unearthed did more than provide water. It opened a channel, suggesting that the divine compassion which once animated the relics of saints now flows as freely and publicly as a mountain stream, inviting the sick of the world to a grotto where the medieval and the modern meet in a single, shocking, and merciful instant of restoration. The promise of healing at Lourdes flows from a spring, but in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a different kind of miracle is measured in drops of blood. High above the bustling streets of Naples, in the Duomo's chapel, rests a small, sealed glass vial. Inside is a dark, solid mass believed to be the dried blood of Saint Januarius, a bishop martyred in the year 305. For over 6 centuries, 3 times each year, the city holds its breath. On the Saturday before the first Sunday in May, on September 19th, his feast day, and on December 16th, the relic is brought out for a ceremony of immense public tension. The vial is placed on the altar, and the Zeke, a group of elderly women who are the saint's most ardent devotees, begin a fervent, rhythmic prayer. They plead with the saint, their voices rising in an ancient dialect, begging for his blood to flow. The entire city watches, for the outcome is never guaranteed. When the miracle occurs, the dark, hardened substance gradually softens, becoming a bright, bubbling liquid that sometimes even seems to increase in volume. The cardinal holding the vial will turn it, showing the liquefied blood to the roaring crowd, and bells across Naples peal in celebration. This is seen as a powerful sign of the saint's favor, promising protection from the ever-present threat of Vesuvius and bringing good fortune for the coming year. But when the blood remains solid, a pall falls over Naples. Failure to liquefy is interpreted as a dire omen, a warning of impending disaster, plague, or war. Throughout history, these failures have eerily coincided with calamities, from devastating eruptions to the outbreak of world wars, cementing the belief in the saint's prophetic warning. This is not a miracle locked in the past. It is a living, breathing ritual that has dictated the emotional and spiritual climate of a city for generations. The ceremony itself is profoundly medieval in its structure and stakes. It places the fate of a modern metropolis in the hands of a 4th-century martyr, mediated through the intense devotion of the Zeke and the physical state of a relic. Science has offered various theories over the years, suggesting the substance might be a thixotropic gel that liquefies under the agitation and warmth of handling. But no explanation has ever fully accounted for the timing, the variability, or the deep cultural certainty surrounding the event. For Neapolitans, it transcends chemistry. It is a direct conversation with their patron, a tangible barometer of divine mood. The miracle of San Gennaro is a covenant written in blood, a recurring mystery that binds a city's anxiety to its hope, proving that some medieval pacts between heaven and earth are renewed not in quiet prayer, but in the roaring, collective suspense of a cathedral square, waiting for a dark vial to fill with light. The fate of a city could hinge on a vial of blood, but the destiny of an entire empire once turned on a vision in the afternoon sky. In the year 312, the Roman world was fractured by civil war. 2 emperors, Constantine and Maxentius, faced each other across the Tiber River, their armies poised for a final, brutal confrontation near the Milvian Bridge. Constantine, though respectful of the traditional gods, was not a committed Christian. He was a pragmatic soldier, and on the eve of this decisive battle, he was a man desperately seeking any advantage, any sign from the heavens that might grant him victory. According to the historian Eusebius, who recorded Constantine's own account, the sign came in a form no one expected. As the emperor prayed, he and his entire army witnessed a miraculous apparition. High above the sun, a cross of light appeared, woven from the very fabric of the sky. Beside it were the Greek letters chi and rho, the first two letters of Christ's name, forming a sacred monogram. And with this symbol came a divine command, a phrase that would echo through history: in hoc signo vinces. In this sign you will conquer. The vision was public, a celestial banner displayed for the legions, but the instruction became personal that night. As Constantine slept, Christ himself appeared in a dream, commanding the emperor to place the chi-rho symbol on the shields of his soldiers as their heavenly standard. Upon waking, Constantine acted without hesitation. He ordered the sacred labarum, a new military standard featuring the chi-rho, to be crafted. His artisans worked through the night, inlaying the symbol onto the shields of his troops. The next day, his army marched under this unfamiliar emblem, a stark declaration that their trust was now placed in the God of the Christians. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge was a rout. Maxentius's forces were shattered, and the rival emperor himself drowned in the Tiber while attempting to flee. Constantine's victory was total and astonishingly complete. For him, the connection was undeniable. The vision had been real, the dream had been true, and the God who delivered it had delivered an empire into his hands. This was more than a battlefield conversion, it was a cosmic contract. In gratitude and in recognition of this new divine patronage, Constantine enacted one of the most revolutionary decrees in Western history. The following year, in 313, he and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. With this proclamation, Christianity was no longer a persecuted, illegal cult. It was granted full legal toleration throughout the Roman Empire. Confiscated property was returned to Christians, and they were free to worship openly. The faith that had grown in catacombs and secret house churches was suddenly invited into the light of the public forum. Constantine's personal miracle triggered a historical avalanche. He began to shower favors upon the church, funding the construction of great basilicas, including the original St. Peter's in Rome. He convened the Council of Nicaea to settle core theological disputes, personally presiding over the gathering of bishops. Within a single lifetime, Christianity transformed from a marginalized sect into the most favored religion of the state, setting it on an irreversible path toward becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire by the end of that century. The vision at the Milvian Bridge stands as perhaps the ultimate political miracle. It fused spiritual revelation with military triumph, creating a template for the concept of divine right that would shape kings and empires for over a millennium. Constantine did not see a weeping statue or a healing spring. He saw a command written in the sky, a strategic alliance offered from heaven itself. His acceptance of that sign did not just win a battle, it rerouted the spiritual trajectory of the Western world, proving that a single moment of perceived divine contact could bend the arc of history itself, turning the page from an age of persecution to an age of emperors kneeling before the cross. Constantine's vision forged an empire, but the daily miracle of survival often unfolded in far humbler settings. In the harsh, wind-swept landscape of 6th century Brittany, a different kind of hunger threatened. A brutal famine had gripped the land, stripping fields bare and leaving communities desperate. Into this crisis stepped a monk named Briac, who would later be known as Saint Briac. His monastery, a simple outpost of faith in a wild country, became a refuge for the starving. Yet the supplies were nearly gone. According to the medieval chronicles, all that remained was a single loaf of bread and one small fish, a pitiful ration against a sea of need. Faced with the pleading eyes of the hungry crowd, Briac did not turn them away. Instead, he did what his faith instructed. He raised the meager provisions, blessed them in the name of Christ, and began to break the bread and divide the fish, handing pieces to his fellow monks to distribute. And as they distributed, something impossible happened. The food did not diminish. The loaf remained whole, the fish intact, no matter how many pieces were torn away. They fed the entire assembly that day, every person receiving their fill from a source that should have vanished with the first handful. This was not just a story of charity, it was a reported event of supernatural multiplication, a direct echo resonating from the pages of the Gospel. For the medieval mind, the parallel was deliberate and profound. In the New Testament, Christ takes 5 loaves and 2 fish, blesses them, and feeds a multitude of 5,000. Centuries later, in a Breton monastery, a saint reenacts the same miracle with even less. This was the living theology of the early Middle Ages. Saints were not merely holy people, they were seen as living conduits of Christ's ongoing power on earth. Their miracles were not their own, but a continuation of his works, a sign that the age of apostles had not ended. When Saint Briac blessed that meager food, he was performing an act of liturgical memory so potent it bent reality. He was showing his community that the Jesus who fed the crowds in Galilee was still present, still compassionate, and still acting through the hands of his servants. This understanding shaped the very role of monastic communities. Monasteries like Saint Briac's were not just spiritual centers, they were social and economic lifelines. In times of famine, war, or plague, people flocked to them because they were believed to be places where heaven's mercy was most accessible. The hope for a multiplication miracle was not naive superstition, it was a logical extension of faith. If a saint could channel divine power to heal the sick or cast out demons, why not to multiply grain or oil in a dire emergency? These stories served a crucial social function. They reinforced the monastery's identity as a divinely protected storehouse, encouraging patronage from nobles and peasants alike, ensuring these institutions could continue their work of prayer, learning, and charity. The miracle at Saint Briac's monastery whispers of a world where faith was expected to manifest in the most practical of ways. It was not enough to preach about God's provision, sometimes through a saint's intercession. That provision had to physically multiply in your hands, filling empty stomachs and confirming a timeless truth, that in the darkest hours, grace could arrive not as a philosophical idea, but as a piece of broken bread that never seems to run out. A loaf that never empties speaks of divine care for the body, but what of a light that guides the soul through every shadow? For Saint Francis of Rome, the miraculous was not an event but a constant companion. In the bustling, plague-ridden world of the early 15th century, Frances was a noblewoman, wife, and mother whose life was a tapestry of intense devotion and demanding duty. She longed for the quiet of the cloister but accepted her vocation in the world, founding a lay order and dedicating herself to serving Rome's poor and sick, especially during outbreaks of disease. It was within this whirlwind of activity, not in a secluded cell, that her unique grace unfolded. From the age of 11, she reported the continual, visible presence of her guardian angel. This was no fleeting vision, it was a perpetual state of companionship that lasted her entire life. Her descriptions of the angel are strikingly vivid. She said it shone with an incandescent light, a brilliance so pure it made the brightest torch seem dim and smoky. This radiance had a practical, tender purpose. As Frances went about her charitable works late into the Roman nights, visiting the destitute or tending to the dying, the angel walked before her. Its light illuminated the dark, cobbled streets, banishing every shadow and making her path perfectly clear and safe. There was no stumble, no fear of the unseen, but the angel's light did more than guide her steps, it illuminated her actions. Frances recounted that when she performed a work of true charity, the angel's light would grow even more intense, as if heaven itself was highlighting and approving the deed. Conversely, if any imperfection, any trace of vanity or selfishness crept into her motive, the light would dim, providing an immediate, gentle correction. Her angel was both protector and moral compass, a living flame of conscience made visible. This intimate, personal miracle is a hallmark of what scholars call late medieval affective spirituality. This was a profound shift in religious focus that emerged in the centuries following saints like Francis of Assisi. While the earlier Middle Ages often emphasized grand, public miracles that authenticated saints or defined nations, this newer spirituality turned inward. It sought the divine not primarily in cosmic signs, but in the personal, emotional experience of God's love. The goal was a heartfelt, intimate union with Christ, often expressed through devotion to his humanity, his childhood, and his passion. In this framework, Francis's angel is a perfect manifestation. The miracle is tailored entirely to her individual journey. It does not convert masses or win battles. It helps one woman navigate darkness, both literal and spiritual, and perfect her love in the grit of daily life. It represents God's intimate involvement in the domestic and the mundane, a direct personal relationship available to anyone, even a busy noblewoman running a household and a charity. Francis's experience whispers a revolutionary idea for its time, that holiness could be woven into the fabric of ordinary life. You did not need to be a mystic in a desert or a knight on a quest. You could encounter the celestial in your own home, on your own street, with a radiant companion making every act of kindness glow with a light only you could see. Her angel bridges the gap between the human and the divine not with thunder, but with a quiet, unwavering luminescence, proving that the most profound miracles are sometimes the ones that walk beside us, turning our simplest good deeds into beacons and our darkest nights into a path of perfect, guided light. Francis of Rome's angel illuminated a private path, but Venice needed a public, celestial patron to secure its destiny on the water. In the year 828, two Venetian merchants found themselves in the bustling, Muslim-controlled port of Alexandria, Egypt. Their mission, whispered in the strictest confidence, was not for spices or silk. It was a sacred heist sanctioned by the Doge himself. Their target was the most precious of treasures, the bodily relics of Saint Mark the Evangelist, one of the four Gospel writers, who was believed to have been martyred in Alexandria centuries before. The local Christian community, fearing desecration under changing political tides, agreed to aid the Venetians in spiriting the saint away to a place of safety and honor. The challenge was the port inspection. Muslim officials, out of religious respect, would not handle pork. Seeing their opportunity, the merchants devised a brilliantly audacious plan. They removed the saint's remains from their ornate casket and placed them in a simple basket. Then they layered the holy bones with thick slabs of cured pork, sealing the entire bundle. When inspectors approached, they recoiled at the sight and smell of the forbidden meat, waving the offensive cargo through without a second glance. Saint Mark was smuggled out of Alexandria not in a golden reliquary, but under a blanket of pork, a moment of gritty, practical sacrilege that served a higher sacred purpose. The voyage home across the Mediterranean was treacherous. As the story is told, a fierce storm erupted, threatening to send the ship and its priceless cargo to the depths. The sailors prayed in desperation to their precious passenger. Then, in the midst of the howling wind and towering waves, Saint Mark himself appeared to the captain. The evangelist, calm and radiant, reassured the terrified man and commanded the sea to be still. Just as Christ had once calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee, his disciple now exercised that same authority, bringing an immediate and profound peace to the waters. The ship sailed smoothly into the Venetian lagoon, its mission complete. This was more than a successful smuggling operation, it was a divine endorsement. Venice, a rising power built on canals and commerce, had lacked a powerful, apostolic patron saint of its own. With the acquisition of Saint Mark's relics, that changed overnight. The city now possessed a direct, physical link to the very beginnings of Christianity, a trophy that rivaled Rome's possession of Saint Peter or Santiago de Compostella's claim to Saint James. The theft was reframed not as larceny, but as a miraculous translation, a holy rescue mission guided by God's own hand to bring the saint to his rightful, glorious home. The political and spiritual messaging was masterful. The Doge ordered the construction of a magnificent chapel adjacent to the palace to house the relics. This chapel would evolve over centuries into the breathtaking Basilica di San Marco, a monument of shimmering gold mosaics and Byzantine splendor that declared Venice's wealth, piety, and independence to the world. The Lion of St. Mark, a winged beast holding a gospel, became the symbol of the Venetian Republic, stamped on coins, flags, and forts across its maritime empire. The tale of the pork and the storm served as the foundational myth for a thousand-year republic. It proved that Venice was not just lucky or shrewd, but divinely favored, protected by an evangelist who calmed seas for its merchants. In that daring act of holy theft, a city of traders secured its soul, building a basilica of staggering beauty, not just to honor a saint, but to celebrate the moment heaven itself conspired in a merchant's cunning plan, using the lowly pig to elevate a lagoon city into a Serenissima, a most serene and sacred kingdom of the sea. The voice that calmed the sea for Venice's merchants would soon speak in a different way, issuing a command that would mend not a ship but the soul of an age. In the quiet Umbrian countryside, the little chapel of San Damiano was a forgotten place. Its stones were crumbling, its roof sagging, a perfect symbol of the spiritual decay that a young man named Francis felt within himself and saw all around him. One day in 1205, he entered this ruin to pray, seeking direction for his troubled heart. Before him hung a large, Byzantine-style crucifix, not the spare figure familiar to later art, but an icon alive with detail. Christ was depicted not dead, but alive and triumphant, his eyes open, surrounded by panels showing saints and angels. It was a cross that spoke of glory, yet it hung in a place of visible decay. As Francis knelt in the dust, his prayer was shattered by a voice that seemed to come from the wood itself. It was clear, direct, and personal. "Francis, go and repair my house, which, as you see, is falling into ruin." The command was undeniable, a divine imperative spoken from the image of the crucified and risen Lord. In that moment, the boundary between prayer and conversation vanished. Heaven had not sent a vision or a feeling, but had used the most central symbol of the faith to issue a direct verbal order. Francis, ever the literalist, took the words at face value. The house was this chapel, the repair was physical. Filled with a fiery zeal, he rushed to his father's textile shop, took bolts of expensive cloth, sold them along with his own horse, and brought the money to the confused priest at San Damiano, demanding it be used to fix the building. This act of reckless charity would lead to his famous confrontation with his father and his ultimate renunciation of worldly wealth. He would indeed spend time physically rebuilding San Damiano and other local chapels, stone by stone. But the true meaning of the command was far grander and more terrifying. The house falling into ruin was not made of stone and mortar. It was the living church itself, fractured by wealth, corruption, and a loss of gospel simplicity. The repair needed was spiritual, a call to return to the radical poverty, humility, and joy of Christ's first followers. The speaking crucifix at San Damiano was the ignition point. That auditory miracle gave Francis his life's mission. From it flowed everything: the founding of the Friars Minor, the order of brothers who owned nothing and lived by begging and working, the creation of the Franciscan nuns with St. Clare, and the Third Order for laypeople. The voice from the cross did not ask for a new theology, but for a living restoration. It launched a movement that would sweep across Europe, challenging the powerful, comforting the poor, and reminding a materialistic age that true riches were found in having nothing, so you could be free to love everything. In that silent ruin, a painted Christ spoke, and a man listened, setting in motion a revolution of the heart that proved sometimes the most world-changing miracles are not vast public spectacles, but a quiet sentence spoken in the dark, waiting for one person humble enough to hear it and brave enough to obey. Francis heard a command from a silent cross, but other saints left behind a touch that lingered, a physical echo of their healing power long after their voices had fallen silent. Among the most striking of these enduring relics is the tale of St. Jude Thaddeus, the apostle often invoked in desperate, hopeless causes. His story intertwines with a king named Abgar, the ruler of the ancient city of Edessa. According to an apocryphal tradition that spread like wildfire through the medieval world, King Abgar was afflicted with a terrible, incurable disease, likely leprosy. Hearing of the miracles of Jesus, he sent a letter pleading for healing. Christ, in reply, promised to send one of his disciples after his ascension. True to that promise, Jude Thaddeus arrived in Edessa. He did not merely pray for the king, he performed a physical act of healing that fused the divine with the material. He took a simple tile, imprinted it with the image of Christ's face, and pressed it to Abgar. Through this contact, the king was miraculously cured. This first miracle established Jude as a healer, a conduit for a power that could cleanse the most feared of diseases. But the tale takes a more dramatic, tangible turn after the apostle's martyrdom. Tradition holds that Jude was beheaded for his faith. In some versions of the legend, the hand he used to heal the king was severed. And this hand, this physical instrument of divine grace, did not become a mere relic to be venerated. It became an active, miraculous object in its own right. It was said to retain its healing power, a kind of sacred battery charged by the saint's lifetime of faith. Pilgrims would touch their afflictions to this iron hand, as it was later encased in metal, and receive cures. The severed hand performed miracles, as if the saint's will and God's power had been permanently imprinted upon his flesh. This concept of a body part continuing the saint's work is profoundly medieval. It collapses the distance between the living saint and the devout seeker. The relic is not a souvenir, it is an extension of the saint's presence, a point where heaven's mercy remains accessible, physically anchored in the world. This theme of restoration through touch finds another classic expression in a different kind of healing, one that unlocked not the body but the voice. Countless medieval saints' lives include a moment where they heal a mute child. Imagine a boy or girl who has never spoken, living in a silent world, often brought by desperate parents to a holy man or woman, perhaps a figure like Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. The saint, moved by compassion or simply as a demonstration of divine authority, would pray over the child. Then, with a touch, a blessing, or even a simple command, the impossible would happen. The child's tongue would be loosed. The first sound might be a gasp, then a word, then a clear sentence. And what was that first sentence? Very often, in these hagiographic accounts, it was a testimony. The child would speak not just any words, but words of praise, naming the saint as a man of God or proclaiming the glory of Christ. This was the ultimate proof. The miracle was not just functional, it was evangelistic. The healed child became a living loudspeaker for divine power, their first words scripted by heaven itself to authenticate the saint's mission. This trope was so common because it served a perfect, multi-layered purpose. On a human level, it showcased the saint's compassion for the innocent and the marginalized. On a theological level, it echoed the gospel miracles of Jesus healing the mute, explicitly linking the saint's power to that of Christ. But on a practical, evidential level, it provided irrefutable testimony. A healed limb could be hidden, a recovered fever could be doubted, but a mute child suddenly speaking complex sentences in front of a crowd was a public, undeniable fact. The child's voice became the evidence, a sound that converted skepticism into awe. So why were these healing miracles of leprous kings and mute children, of living saints and severed hands, so central to the medieval idea of sanctity? They were the primary currency of divine authentication. In a world without modern medicine, where illness was mysterious and often seen as a spiritual affliction, the ability to heal was the clearest possible sign that a person operated with heaven's authority. It proved their prayers were heard, that their life of virtue had granted them a special conduit to God's power. A healing miracle was a contract stamped and sealed by the divine. It showed that the saint's faith was not a private feeling, but a tangible force that could rearrange the very rules of nature, cleansing flesh, restoring function, and loosening tongues. These stories were not just about compassion, though that was their heart. They were about evidence. They answered the perennial human question, how do you know? How do you know this person is holy? How do you know God is real and active? The medieval answer was direct and physical. You know because the leper is cleansed. You know because the silent child speaks your name and gives glory to God. You know because even a severed hand, touched by grace, can continue to warm the world with miracles long after the saint has gone. In these acts of restoration, heaven was not a distant promise, but a present operating power, mending bodies and voices as a down payment on its promise to ultimately mend all of creation. The glow of a forge could illuminate more than metal in the hands of a saint. In the 10th century, Dunstan, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was a man of both profound prayer and practical craft, a master metalworker who found holiness in the rhythm of hammer and anvil. His workshop was not just a place of labor, but a spiritual battleground. One night, as he worked late, the door opened to reveal a visitor of stunning beauty, a woman who entered with whispers meant to distract and corrupt. But Dunstan, his senses sharpened by a life of discipline, saw through the disguise to the malevolence beneath. In a flash of both physical and spiritual insight, he did not recoil. Instead, he seized his red-hot tongs from the fire and clamped them firmly onto the apparition's nose. A shriek tore through the night, not human at all, as the devil, revealed in its true form, fled howling into the darkness, the smell of brimstone and scorched flesh hanging in the air. While the tale centers on a fiery confrontation, medieval artists loved to paint the scene with a specific detail, a divine, clarifying light bursting into the forge at the moment of triumph. This was not the light of the furnace, but a celestial spotlight, illuminating the saint's courage and the fiend's defeat for all to see. This story, gripping in its physicality, opens a window into a fundamental pillar of the medieval world, the constant, real warfare between saints and demons. Miracles were not only about healing the sick or multiplying food, they were about territory. Every holy person was seen as a fortress of grace, and demons were the relentless besiegers, employing temptation, illusion, and outright terror. A saint's power was proven not just by what they could create, but by what they could defeat. Dunstan's hot tongs were a perfect weapon for the conflict, a tool of his earthly trade turned against a spiritual enemy. He did not use a relic or a holy word in that moment. He used the skill of his own hands, sanctified by his faith. This tells us that in the medieval view, the entire material world could be enlisted in this cosmic struggle. Ordinary objects, when wielded by a pure heart, became conduits of divine power. The light that artists added to the scene makes the theology clear. It was God's grace that gave Dunstan the discernment to see the threat and the fortitude to act. This narrative pattern of the holy man or woman outwitting and physically repelling demons was endlessly repeated in saints' lives. Saint Benedict was said to have shattered a poisoned cup simply by making the sign of the cross over it. Saint Margaret of Antioch prayed her way out of the belly of a demonic dragon. These were not fantasy adventures, they were doctrinal statements in story form. They reassured ordinary people that the evil they feared in shadows, in plagues, in sudden madness, had a name and could be resisted. The saints were their champions, proving that with faith, even the devil's nose could be caught and held in a grip of holy iron. These tales transformed abstract spiritual warfare into something vivid, tangible, and oddly comforting, a promise that the light in the forge and in the saint's soul would always be stronger than the deepest, most deceptive night. The fire that could not scorch a devil could also refuse to consume a holy book. In the misty, pagan world of 6th century Ireland, a young monk named Columba was copying a psalter, a book of sacred psalms, by lamplight. His hand moved carefully across the vellum, each word a labor of love and devotion. This was no ordinary task, for in an age before printing, each book was a unique treasure, a physical vessel for the divine word. Columba's work, however, caught the attention of the local king, a ruler named Diomede who viewed the spreading Christian faith with suspicion. In an act meant to demonstrate his earthly authority over this new spiritual power, the king demanded the Psalter. When Columba refused to surrender it, Diomede seized the book himself. His judgment was swift and symbolic. He ordered the Psalter thrown into a great fire, a public destruction meant to prove that this foreign god's words were as fragile as the parchment they were written on. The flames roared, consuming the fuel around it, but when the fire died down and the ashes cooled, the onlookers saw something impossible. There, lying amidst the blackened ruin, was the Psalter. Its leather binding was untouched, its pages uncharred. Not a single letter of its text had been lost to the blaze. The fire had obeyed a higher law. This event, recorded in early chronicles of Saint Columba's life, became a cornerstone of his legend. It was a miracle with a crystal-clear message, directed as much at the watching community as at the defiant king. The pagan flames had proven powerless against the word of God. This was not merely a story about a book surviving a fire, it was a theological statement made visible. In the medieval worldview, scripture was not just a collection of inspiring stories. It was the living, active voice of God, a tangible extension of divine power into the world. To burn a Bible was not just an act of censorship, it was an attempt to silence God himself. The miracle declared that such an attempt was futile. The word was indestructible because its source was eternal. This motif of the unburned Bible appears again and again in martyr stories across centuries, from early Roman persecutions to later conflicts. It served as the ultimate divine rebuttal. When authorities sought to erase the faith by destroying its texts, heaven would intervene in the most humiliating way possible, leaving the very object of their hatred sitting pristine in the ashes, a silent, mocking witness to the limits of human power. For believers, this miracle did more than protect a physical object. It affirmed that the truth contained within those pages was likewise impervious to the changing winds of politics, persecution, and time. The Psalter that survived Diomede's fire became a relic of a different kind, a proof that the divine promise was not sealed in a distant heaven, but was present here on earth in ink and parchment that even a king's fury could not erase. The fire that could not touch a holy book would soon lead pilgrims to a different kind of flame, one that burned not with destruction but with the promise of ultimate healing. In the year 326, an elderly woman of immense determination arrived in Jerusalem. This was Saint Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, the very ruler whose vision had legalized Christianity. Now in her 70s, she undertook a journey of staggering difficulty, not for conquest but for discovery. Her mission was to uncover the physical traces of the Passion of Christ, to find the very ground where heaven and earth had collided. The city was still scarred by centuries of Roman rule, its sacred geography buried under pagan temples deliberately built to obscure Christian memory. Helena sought one object above all, the true cross. According to the accounts that would become legend, her search seemed hopeless until a divine sign intervened. One version tells of a miraculous revelation, a sweet-smelling smoke rising from a particular patch of earth on the hill of Golgotha. Another speaks of a vision guiding her to the spot. Following this heavenly clue, she ordered excavations to begin. Digging deep beneath the rubble, her workers made an astounding find. They uncovered 3 ancient crosses along with the titulus, the plaque that had hung above Christ bearing the inscription, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." But a profound problem remained. Which of the 3 crosses was the true instrument of salvation? The wood itself offered no obvious answer. The test devised was as practical as it was theological. The local bishop, Macarius, proposed a trial by miracle. A noble woman of the city lay deathly ill. One by one, the 3 crosses were brought to her bedside. The first 2 crosses were touched to her body with no effect, but when the 3rd cross was brought near, the woman was instantly and completely healed. This was the confirmation. The true cross was not identified by its appearance but by its action. It carried within its fibers a residual, active power, a grace that could reach across centuries to perform a healing in the present moment. This event did more than authenticate a piece of wood. It created the foundational relic of the Christian world. Helena had portions of the cross encased in silver and gold, sending pieces to Constantinople and Rome, while the largest portion remained in Jerusalem, enshrined in the magnificent church of the Holy Sepulchre that her son Constantine built over the site. The discovery and its accompanying miracle became the engine for the entire medieval economy of relic veneration. It provided the template. A true relic was not merely an old object, it was a conduit. It had to be discovered through divine guidance, often after being lost or hidden, and its authenticity was proven through a miraculous sign, typically a healing. The true cross set the standard. Fragments of it, called lignum crucis, would spread across Europe, each tiny sliver mounted in lavish reliquaries in cathedrals and monasteries. These fragments were believed to carry a portion of that same healing, protective power. Kings went into battle with crosses containing fragments of the true cross. Churches were founded upon the gift of a tiny piece. The quest for relics became a sacred pursuit, driving pilgrimage, inspiring art, and defining the spiritual geography of the continent. Helena's discovery answered a deep human hunger for tangible connection. It transformed the cross from a symbol of shame into a treasured physical witness. It told the medieval world that the central event of their faith was not a metaphor, but a historical reality that had left a splintered, miraculous residue in the world, a piece of wood that could still, if you believed, reach out and close the gap between a first-century hill and a sick woman's bedside, between a moment of supreme sacrifice and the daily hope for mercy. The splintered wood of the true cross promised healing for the sick, but the most desperate prayers often came from parents fearing for their children. In the cold reality of the medieval world, where famine and danger were constant shadows, a saint's power was measured by his ability to shield the innocent. This protective mantle found its perfect champion in a 4th-century bishop from Myra, a man whose legend would grow to encompass the entire globe. Long before he was associated with gifts and reindeer, Saint Nicholas was celebrated for a miracle so shocking it cemented his role as the divine guardian of the young. The story begins with a terrible famine. In a time of desperation, a wicked innkeeper saw opportunity not in charity but in cruelty. When 3 young boys, likely students traveling the road, sought shelter at his establishment, he saw not guests but a source of meat. He murdered the children, dismembered their bodies, and hid the remains in a large pickling barrel, intending to sell the flesh as food. It was a crime of profound horror, a violation of the most basic trust. Soon after, Bishop Nicholas, known for his travels and his care for the poor, happened to stop at that very inn. As he rested, he was troubled by a deep spiritual unease, a sense of evil clinging to the place. Guided by this divine prompting, he went to the cellar and confronted the pickling tub. Upon opening it, he did not just discover the crime, he recognized the victims. Overcome with holy fury and compassion, Nicholas raised his hands in prayer. He called upon the power of God, not merely to condemn the murderer, but to undo the murder itself. And as he prayed, the brine in the barrel began to stir. Limbs reassembled, flesh restored, and the 3 boys climbed out, whole and alive, restored to the world as if they had merely been sleeping. This gruesome yet ultimately hopeful tale became a cornerstone of Nicholas' medieval fame. Its origins are ancient, appearing in some of the earliest accounts of his life, and it spoke directly to the fears of every parent in an uncertain age. The miracle operated on multiple levels. It showcased the saint's spiritual discernment, his ability to see through deception to hidden evil. It demonstrated God's power over even the most final of human acts, death itself. But most importantly, it established Nicholas as the specific patron and avenger of children. He was the heavenly authority who would seek out the lost, confront their predators, and bring them home. This narrative of rescue and restoration directly fueled his legendary generosity. The famous story of Nicholas secretly providing dowries for 3 impoverished girls by tossing bags of gold through their window at night is part of the same character. Both tales show a saint who acts covertly with personal attention to save the vulnerable from a terrible fate, whether a life of poverty or a barrel of brine. His charity was not abstract, it was interventionist. He didn't just pity children, he entered the darkness to pull them back into the light. This protective, generous Bishop of Myra became, over centuries of storytelling and cultural blending, the ancestor of the Santa Claus we know today. The red robes evolved from his bishop's vestments. The secret nighttime gift-giving echoed his clandestine aid, and the central promise of the figure, that a benevolent, magical being watches over children, knows their needs, and rewards the good, flows directly from that ancient miracle at the inn. The pickling barrel is a far cry from a toy workshop, but the core message is identical, a promise of vigilance and miraculous care. In that dark cellar, Saint Nicholas didn't just resurrect 3 boys, he forged an eternal archetype, the idea that in a frightening world, there exists a sacred power dedicated solely to ensuring that children, against all odds, are found, protected, and brought safely home. The horror of the pickling barrel revealed a saint's power to restore life, but in the quiet desperation of a 13th century home, a different kind of violation would summon a sign of life eternal. In the Portuguese town of Santarém, a woman's heart was tangled in a web of earthly desire. Convinced that her husband's affections were straying, she sought a remedy not in prayer or patience, but in forbidden magic. A local sorceress promised a solution, but it required a terrible ingredient, a consecrated host from the Mass. To use the body of Christ as a component in a love spell was a profound sacrilege, an attempt to harness divine power for selfish, manipulative ends. Yet, blinded by her anguish and jealousy, the woman agreed. She attended Mass, received the Eucharist, and instead of consuming it, she slipped the sacred wafer from her mouth and into a piece of cloth. The moment she stepped from the church, the miracle began. The host in her hand did not remain a simple piece of bread. It started to bleed, not a few drops, but a profuse, alarming flow of real, warm blood, soaking through the linen and staining her hands. This was no subtle sign. It was a visceral, shocking rebuttal, as if the very heart of Christ was wounded anew by her intended blasphemy. Terrified, she rushed home, her plan in ruins, replaced by sheer panic. She did not know what to do with this bleeding, accusing presence. In a frantic attempt to hide the evidence of her sacrilege, she shoved the host into a wooden trunk in her bedroom, burying it among her belongings. But heaven's light cannot be so easily concealed. That night, a mysterious, radiant glow began to emanate from the closed trunk, piercing the darkness of her room with an unearthly luminescence. It was a light of pure exposure, illuminating not just the physical space but the darkness of her own action. The miracle had followed her home. She could hide the host, but she could not hide from the divine reality it made manifest. Overwhelmed with guilt and fear, she finally confessed everything to her husband. Together, they went to the local priest, revealing the entire story and the miraculous bleeding host. The priest, understanding the gravity of what had occurred, carefully retrieved the host. To properly preserve it, he placed it in a container of consecrated wax, a small, secure vessel meant for reverence. But the miracles of Santarém were not finished. When the priest later went to check on the relic, he found the wax container floating in mid-air, suspended without any support, as if the very laws of gravity bowed before the sanctity within. This final sign, the host refusing to be bound even by a container of sacred wax, underscored the message. The Eucharist was not an object to be controlled, used, or hidden. It was a living presence, sovereign and free, responding to sacrilege not with punishment, but with undeniable physical proof of its own divine nature. The woman's love spell was never cast, but in its place she received a far more powerful lesson, written in blood and light. The host was eventually enshrined in the Church of St. Stephen, now known as the Church of the Holy Miracle, where pilgrims still venerate it today. Like the miracle of Bolsena, the event at Santarém served as a dramatic public affirmation of the real presence, a heaven-sent shock to the conscience of an individual and a community. It whispered a stern, merciful truth that the divine sometimes allows itself to be taken, only to reveal its glory in the most unexpected and undeniable ways, turning a moment of intended magic into an eternal testament of grace. The blood and light of Santarém revealed a divine presence that could not be contained, but at the moment of a holy death, that presence would often announce itself in a different key, not with a shock but with a song. In the quiet convent of San Damiano in the year 1253, Saint Clare of Assisi lay dying. This was the woman who had heard her friend Francis call to radical poverty and had founded the Order of the Poor Clares, living a life of such intense prayer and austerity that her very spirit seemed to have worn her body thin. As her sisters gathered around her bedside in the dim cell, their grief was palpable. Then, as her last breath left her, something wondrous filled the air. The attending nuns later testified that the room was suddenly suffused with the sound of a celestial choir. It was not a music of this world, but a harmony of unearthly beauty, as if the very atmosphere had been tuned to a heavenly frequency to welcome her soul home. This was no mournful dirge, but a joyful, triumphant anthem, a sound that transformed the moment of profound human loss into one of luminous spiritual gain. For those sisters, the auditory miracle was a final, gentle gift from their beloved mother. It was a divine confirmation that Clare's lifelong journey was not ending in silence and darkness, but in a glorious transition, escorted by angels into the presence of the God she had loved so completely. This peaceful miracle at Clare's passing belongs to a cherished tradition in medieval saints' lives known as the deathbed sign. When a holy person died, heaven would often offer a tangible token, a final seal of approval on their sanctity. These signs took many forms. A mysterious, sweet fragrance might fill the room, a symbol of the odor of sanctity. A brilliant, unearthly light might shine upon the body, or a single flower might bloom out of season on the windowsill. For some saints, like the great scholar Thomas Aquinas, a luminous host was seen ascending from his mouth at the moment of death, a final Eucharistic vision. But the celestial music heard for Clare was among the most comforting and evocative of all. In a world where death was a constant, often terrifying companion, plagued by war, famine, and disease, these miracles served a crucial psychological and theological purpose. They were not just for the saint, but for the community left behind. The beautiful music or the sudden fragrance was a direct communication from the other side of the veil. It was heaven's way of saying, "Do not grieve as those without hope. What you fear as an end is for the righteous a glorious beginning." The miracle offered concrete evidence of the promises preached from the pulpit. It turned abstract doctrine about paradise into a sensory experience, something heard, smelled, or seen by reliable witnesses. This provided immense comfort, not only about the fate of the individual saint, but about the very structure of reality. It affirmed that the afterlife was not a vague spiritual concept, but a real place, populated by angels who would come to greet a faithful soul with song. For the medieval mind, constantly negotiating the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds, a deathbed miracle like Clare's was the ultimate authentication. A life of virtue could be hidden, motives could be questioned, but a public, supernatural event at the moment of death was considered God's own final verdict. It closed the biography of the saint with a divine signature, proving their path had been true and their destination assured. In that humble room at San Damiano, the sisters' sorrow was not erased, but it was transfigured. Their tears were met with a harmony that spoke of welcome, not farewell. Claire's silent departure was accompanied by a chorus that assured them the walls between heaven and earth were, for a soul like hers, nothing more than a curtain parting onto an eternal and beautifully resonant light. Even the most ferocious heart could be gentled by a voice that spoke with heaven's own authority. The town of Gubbio was held captive by a terror that walked on four legs. A massive lone wolf had turned from hunting deer in the forest to stalking the streets, killing livestock and even the townspeople themselves. Fear was a prison with no one daring to venture beyond the walls. Into this atmosphere of dread stepped Francis of Assisi. Hearing the pleas of the townsfolk, he did not take up a weapon or organize a hunt. He walked out of the city gate alone, making the sign of the cross as his only defense. When the wolf charged him, Francis commanded it to stop in the name of Christ. The beast halted, and Francis spoke to it not as a monster but as a brother, calling it Brother Wolf. He reproached the wolf for its crimes but acknowledged its hunger. Then he proposed a pact. If the wolf would cease its attacks, the people of Gubbio would feed it regularly from their own doors. To seal this extraordinary peace treaty, the wolf placed its paw in Francis's hand. It then followed him back into the town, where an astonished crowd witnessed the once terrifying creature become a docile, almost penitent guest. The people kept their word, feeding the wolf until its natural death, when it was mourned by the entire community. This was more than a charming fable. For the medieval mind, it was a living parable of redemption and restored order. The wolf represented untamed, fallen nature, driven by a predatory hunger that mirrored humanity's own sinful impulses. Francis, in a state of perfect grace, did not destroy the beast but redeemed its place in the community. The pact transformed a relationship of fear and violence into one of mutual obligation and peace. It showed that holiness could re-knit the torn fabric of creation, if only one had the courage to offer a hand instead of a blade. This power to communicate with the wild was not unique to Francis. It was a recurring signature in the lives of the saints, a divine echo of a lost paradise. In his desert cell, Saint Jerome, the great scholar translating the Bible, was said to have calmly removed a thorn from the paw of a lion. The grateful beast thereafter stayed by his side as a loyal companion, guarding his donkey. Celtic saints like Columba commanded respect from the animal kingdom as a matter of course. When a mysterious water beast killed a man in the river Ness, Columba ordered his monk to swim across and retrieve a boat, and when the beast rose again, the saint made the sign of the cross and commanded it to depart in God's name, and it fled in terror. Even earlier, legends of the Desert Fathers tell of saints like Saint Gerasemus living alongside a lion that served him meekly. These stories were never just about animal training. They were theological statements written in the language of nature. After the fall of Adam, the book of Genesis describes a rupture between humanity and the animal world, a relationship now defined by fear and domination. The saints, through their intense asceticism and prayer, were believed to have regained a measure of Adam's original, pre-fall state of innocence and authority. Their miracles demonstrated a harmony restored. A lion lying peacefully at a saint's feet or a wolf honoring a pact was a glimpse of Eden. It proved that the curse of the fall was not absolute, that grace could flow backward, healing ancient enmities and restoring a rightful hierarchy where a holy human, acting as God's steward, commanded not through force but through a recognized spiritual sovereignty. These animal miracles answered a deep cultural anxiety about the wild, untamed world beyond the village fence. They assured people that the forest and the desert, realms of chaos and danger, were still under God's ultimate command, and that his most faithful servants could walk through them unharmed, surrounded by respect that turned predators into protectors. In the quiet obedience of a wolf or a lion, the medieval world saw a reflection of its own highest hope, that every fierce and broken thing might one day be called brother and find its peace. A belt of woven wool and gold thread became the ultimate proof of heaven. The doctrine of the Assumption, the belief that the Virgin Mary was taken body and soul into paradise at the end of her earthly life, presented a beautiful mystery for the medieval faithful. The scriptures were silent on the details, offering no narrative of how this momentous event unfolded. Into that sacred silence stepped a powerful tradition, one that provided not just a story but a physical object to hold. It centered on the Apostle Thomas, who, according to this legend, was not present at Mary's death. Just as he had doubted the resurrection of Christ until he could touch the wounds, he now doubted her glorious Assumption. As the other apostles gathered around her empty tomb, Thomas, arriving late, begged for a sign, and heaven obliged. As Mary ascended, she looked down upon her grieving and questioning friend. In a gesture of maternal tenderness and evidential grace, she untied the girdle from around her waist, her simple belt, and let it fall into Thomas's waiting hands. This was the Sacra Cintola, the holy belt. In that single act, a theological mystery received a tangible answer. Thomas, the saint of physical proof, was given the ultimate relic, a direct gift from the Assumption itself, a piece of clothing that had traveled from earth to the threshold of heaven and back. The relic's journey to its modern home is a tale of adventure and divine providence. Centuries after Thomas, the belt was said to be in the Holy Land. In the 12th century, a merchant from the Tuscan town of Prato named Michel d'Agamari was traveling in the east. He married a local woman whose family, according to the story, had safeguarded the sacred belt for generations. Upon their return to Prato, his wife brought the relic with her as her most precious possession. When Michel died, his widow, facing pressure to remarry, decided to entrust the belt to the local priest. She revealed its astonishing history, and the priest, recognizing the immense spiritual treasure now in his care, placed it within the town's main church. The people of Prato now possessed a direct material link to the most intimate moment of Mary's glorification. But how do you prove such an extraordinary claim? The relic authenticated itself through action. The Sacra Cintola quickly became famous for miracles of healing and protection. Pilgrims flocked to Prato, and many who touched or prayed before the belt reported being cured of illnesses, especially those related to childbirth and fertility, areas under Mary's special patronage. The belt was also credited with protecting the town itself. During times of plague or siege, the relic would be displayed on the church's outer pulpit, a spiritual bastion against disaster. The most famous miracle associated with it occurred in 1314. A woman named Giovanna, accused of a crime and sentenced to death, prayed desperately to the Virgin of the Holy Belt. As she was led to execution, the noose around her neck broke 3 times. The stunned authorities, seeing this as a clear divine intervention, pardoned her on the spot. This dramatic rescue cemented the belt's reputation as an instrument of merciful power. The theological impact of this object cannot be overstated. In an age where faith was reinforced through sight and touch, the Sacra Cintola did something profound. It filled the narrative gap of the Assumption with a story that was personal, vivid, and evidenced by a physical artifact. It transformed a complex doctrine into a relatable scene, a mother reassuring a doubting friend. The belt was more than a piece of cloth, it was a bridge. It connected the faithful in medieval Tuscany directly to the moment the earthly and heavenly realms touched at Mary's Assumption. Every thread of that woven wool seemed to whisper that the mysteries of heaven are not always distant abstractions. Sometimes they descend gently into human hands, offering a knot of tangible grace to hold onto when belief strains against the limits of the unseen. The fresco in San Sepolcro did not weep blood or shine with unearthly light. It was a quiet, haunting image of the Man of Sorrows, painted in the early 14th century on the wall of a modest church. This was not the triumphant Christ in majesty, but Jesus after the crucifixion, depicted from the waist up, his eyes downcast, his body bearing the wounds of the Passion, a crown of thorns still pressed upon his head. He was presented not in a narrative scene, but in a direct devotional portrait meant for intimate contemplation. The power of this image lay in its heartbreaking humanity, its invitation to silently share in a moment of sacred sorrow. This artistic focus was the product of a profound shift in medieval spirituality. By the late Middle Ages, a movement often called affective piety was sweeping through Europe. Theologians and preachers like Saint Bernard of Clairvaux had encouraged believers to move beyond abstract doctrine and to engage emotionally with the humanity of Jesus, to imaginatively place themselves at the foot of the cross, to feel the weight of the nails and the depth of the sacrifice. This was faith experienced through the heart's compassion, a deliberate stirring of love and grief meant to forge a deeper, more personal bond with the divine. The Man of Sorrows fresco was a perfect tool for this devotion, a focal point for private meditation where a worshipper could stand alone and commune with a Christ who seemed to embody every human pain. And in San Sepolcro, for one devout woman, that communion broke the silence of the painted wall. According to the local tradition, as she prayed fervently before the image, lost in her own sorrows, the fresco spoke. The painted Christ addressed her directly, offering words of comfort and consolation. It was a miracle without spectacle, witnessed by no crowd, leaving no physical evidence. It was a private audience, a whispered response to a heart laid bare in prayer. This type of miracle, a speaking image, represents the ultimate fulfillment of the affective piety movement. If the goal was to achieve a heartfelt, personal connection with the suffering Savior, then what greater confirmation could there be than for that Savior to personally acknowledge your devotion? The fresco became more than a representation, it became a portal. The miracle validated the entire spiritual exercise, proving that the emotional investment, the tears shed before the image, were not in vain. Heaven was listening, and it could respond through the very art that helped focus the soul's longing. In a world where grand public miracles authenticated saints and relics, this quiet event in San Sepolcro authenticated the individual's inner journey. It made the cosmic drama of salvation intimately accessible, suggesting that the divine was not only present in cathedrals and processions, but in the hushed corner of a local church, in the dialogue between a grieving soul and a painted face. This personal revelation through art whispers a revolutionary idea that sometimes the most profound encounter with the sacred requires no pilgrimage to a distant tomb, but only the courage to stand before an image and speak, and to believe against all expectation that it might just speak back. The fresco in San Sepolcro that whispered to a single soul represents the most intimate end of a vast spectrum. From the private comfort of a speaking painting to the public spectacle of a dancing sun, from the incorruptible body of a humble shepherdess to the heavenly knight who saved a kingdom, we have journeyed through 35 tales that define the medieval experience of the divine. These stories were far more than simple folklore or charming legends, for the people who told them, wrote them down, and built cathedrals to house their relics. They were the vital evidence of a living God. They were proof that heaven was not a distant, silent realm, but an active participant in history, one that intervened to reward faith, punish blasphemy, protect the innocent, and offer a tangible hand of hope in a world shadowed by plague, war, and uncertainty. This tapestry of miracles did not just fill chronicles, it shaped reality. It built the very stones of places like Santa Maria Maggiore and the Basilica of San Marco. It inspired the soaring art of Giotto and the luminous gold of Byzantine mosaics. It gave kings a mandate to rule and gave peasants a reason to endure. In an age before scientific explanations, these enchanted tales were the framework through which every event, from a personal illness to a national invasion, could be understood and endured. They answered the deepest human questions with stories written in blood, light, and unexpected grace. So we leave this journey with a question for you. Which of these 35 tales resonated most deeply? Was it the desperate faith behind the miracle of Bolsena, the protective fury of the Black Madonna, or the quiet, enduring mystery of Bernadette Soubirous? Do you believe in the possibility of such divine interventions, or do you see them as powerful metaphors for human hope and resilience? The conversation is yours now. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. And if you loved this deep dive into medieval mysteries, be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the unknown where history and wonder meet. Until next time, keep wondering.